Welcome to the Geek Review, the podcast focused on innovative and creative ideas in the legal industry. I'm Marlene Gaybauer.
And I'm Greg Lambert. So, Marlene, I completely forgot about this. I know AALL has been a few weeks ago, but I was reminded today on LinkedIn that the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency,
recruiting at AALL,
was recruiting law librarians. And the funniest thing about this, one, I got a little bit behind the scenes as well, but I noticed they only had their first names. There was no, and apparently that's how they
for special and specific skills. Is that what I understand too?
Yeah, they were looking for a certain set of skills, but apparently it caused some issues because they not only did they only use their first name at the conference, that's how they signed all the contracts, was first name only. And so when things got shipped in, there was only a first name on it. And actually
they didn't know where to bring it.
The hotel held it and actually called the police to check to make sure that it was. So, I think sometimes, the logistics of doing conferences for the CIA
is a little too top secret.
It's a little too top secret. So it was fun. I really enjoyed the fact that my sister-in-law always tags along for these things, and I get her a vendor hall pass as well. And so she was very confident that she was too old to be recruited by the CIA. They quickly told her that apparently you're never too old to be recruited by the CIA. And even science teachers have value to the CIA.
You have special skills.
As long as you have special skills. So, yeah, I think this was the first year that they were there, but they said they will be back. So whether we see them or not, that might be the trick.
That's right.
All right, well, let's jump into today's show. So we have with us a very special guest, Douglas J. Wood. Doug's a renowned entertainment and media lawyer with over 4 decades of experience. And Doug has built and managed multi-million-dollar practice and served as general counsel for the Association of National Advertisers, along with, and this is why we have him, being a very prolific author, both in fiction and nonfiction.
Today, we'll discuss his latest book, From Dawn to Dusk, which offers insights that are invaluable in building a successful legal practice and transitioning towards retirement. So, Doug, welcome to the Geek and Review.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So, Doug, before we jump into your book, From Dawn to Dusk, I know you've written a number of books over the year, including fiction and nonfiction, and I'm really interested in what does a lawyer write, as far as fiction? What kind of fiction do you like to write?
Most of my other books, my fictional books, are essentially thrillers, political thrillers, terrorist thrillers, and sort of get my aggression out with fictional characters rather than people on the other side of the negotiating table. I'm soft there and hard in the books.
I can totally see that. I've seen some of the people on the other side of the table, and murder mysteries really pop into my head when I'm talking with them.
There's a lot of lawyers who write novels. I think it must be an outlet for us to get our frustrations out or to be creative in ways that can't get overruled. So, it's a side gig that's a lot of fun to do.
So I want to turn to your latest book, which is basically a guide for practice. And why are you emphasizing the importance of a written business plan for lawyers, and what common mistakes do lawyers make when they're planning their careers?
It all stems from when I first graduated law school. I didn't go to a very famous law school. I went relatively unknown law school and ended up in a law firm that's relatively small. All the folks, the partners there were middle to more, a little senior, but not in their 60s or 70s. So there was little likelihood that I would be inheriting anything or they would be giving me any business. So I resorted to looking at business books because I had no idea. You're not taught in law school how to build a business or run a business. That's just not in the curriculum.
Still not.
Well, I started reading a whole lot of business books and sort of getting my cheapest MBA I could. Realized that basic business planning, whether you teach it at Stanford or Harvard or Oxford or whatever, is a very regimented system of written business plans that are very strategic or tactical, start with what they call a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And from there, you build a tactical plan, the key of which is tactics. So I embraced that as a young attorney because the mentors were there, but they weren't really passing on business. And over the years, he kept working and working until it kept building and building. And I think that what young lawyers don't do is recognize that they got to put their egos aside and understand that it's a business. And if you want to build a business, you've got to use basic business principles. Do it. And if you're loyal to them and you follow through with them, you're virtually guaranteed to succeed. And I say to folks, if I did it, you can do it. This is not rocket science. It's a function of being diligent to staying with a written plan, finding the time. You always have the time, and to be extremely tactical. What are you going to do? When are you going to do it? How are you going to do it? Who are you going to need to help you? Don't do it alone. It's a process. And that's what I try to talk about in the first half of the book. The dawn side of the book is how someone can use those common principles of business development to develop a legal practice.
Do you recommend getting an MBA or having some sort of formal business training for new lawyers?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't do that, but if I had my druthers and go back 45, whatever the number is, years, any one of those joint JD MBA degrees is probably a good step forward. I mean, I didn't do that, obviously. I got my JD, got an LLM in trade regulation, which I nothing to go business. But yeah, if you could do that, if you got the time. But I also think it's not rocket science. So really, in terms of what we do as lawyers, it's not all that complicated. We're not reinventing the light bulb every day. And we're basically just trying to convince people that we're good as lawyers and that they could use our help. So that can be very organized in terms of tactics, whether it's networking, all sorts of other things you can do. And that's kind of what I talk about in the book.
One of the things that, and I know we were talking about kind of the use side of being a lawyer within your first few years. I think a lot of times, you're so busy doing that you don't necessarily think about what your long range plans are. And I think it's really interesting in your book how you kind of stress that the earlier the better when it comes to planning out your career and what your strategic goals would be. So how should young lawyers focus on setting a strong foundation for their career, and and more importantly, how should they be measuring that progress along the way?
You start out kind of simple. I mean, you're not trying to, create $1 million in your first year out. I mean, it's really small steps that you systematically take. I had one partner that I mentored over the years, and the way she made sure she took the steps she needed to, she had Post-it notes all over her computer screen so that she would constantly see. There's like a to-do list on your refrigerator. The reason you do the list on your refrigerator, literally, it's an actual physiological thing that happens to your brain. It gets sick and tired of looking at it and makes you do it. And so as long as you start with that simple steps and keep building on it year by year and staying to the discipline, where I've seen a lot of lawyers stumble is where they just don't stay to the discipline because they have the excuse, I've got so much else I have to do. I'm busy. My clients are demanding. My family's demanding. I get all that. And that obviously is a difficult challenge. But as long as you stay disciplined with your tactics and find people to help you, don't do it alone. You've got your assistants, you've got your associates, you've got your partners. Make it a family kind of a thing, if you will. And that sounds a little silly, but it's kind of just getting a network together of people who are going to help you do it. It'll be a lot easier to do it that way as well.
And what about the measurements? What's a couple of examples of things that you think
there are two sets
along the way?
There are a set of measurements that are traditional that a law firm will put upon your billable hours, your revenues, your realization, all those. Those are not goals to developing your business. Those are goals that you have to maintain in order to keep your job. So they should be focused on, but that's not the kind of business planning I'm talking. I'm talking about saying, okay, I want to develop this expertise. I want to target that particular business or client. I want to accomplish this particular thing in my career, whether it's being rated in Chambers or Legal 500 or whatever it is, with its very specific goals, in addition to those that are established by your firm. So you focus on those, you get your tactics towards those, you keep developing. And at the end of the year, what I always used to do, I just had a list of all my tactics, and I would just say, done, not done, done, not done, done, not done. The more tactically you are and give it a goal, the more likely it is that you'll achieve that goal. So you don't have one tactic or two tactics. You have 10, 15, 20 tactics oriented towards accomplishing that particular goal. And if you measure that by saying, yeah, I did that tactic, that one, that one, that one, you're virtually guaranteed to achieve the goal. That's what they'll tell you in business.
I want to switch from the dawn more to dusk. part of the yeah, I'm really sort of interested in this answer because I think it's really tough thing. What emotional and practical challenges do lawyers face when transitioning out of active practice and how can they prepare?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I sort of try to prepare for it, but as I explained in the second half of the book, there is a real emotional challenge to letting go of a multi-million dollar practice and then finding what you're going to do next with your life. The biggest emotional strain you go through is a feeling of relevance because people innocently think, Doug's getting older and he doesn't need to be bothered by this, or I'll put it to BCC. I won't bother with this particular meeting. That's all very innocent and good natured what they're doing, but they don't realize that the message that it's giving the senior attorney is that you're no longer relevant. The reality is that you will eventually be irrelevant. One way or the other, you're going to be irrelevant. But at some point in your career, you need to embrace that possibility of irrelevancy and figure out by a plan. The same kind of planning I did, in my case, the same kind of planning I did to build a practice, I did the same thing in terms of transitioning my practice. It started 5 years before I left the firm. I started process and worked with the firm to do that, to help get over those kind of hurdles that I didn't know at the time I was going to face. I was hardly anyone that hadn't been there, done that yet. And along the way, I dealt with each of those sort of emotional moments that you go through in transitioning, giving up and trying to figure out what you can do next. And that's what I try to talk about in the book. The thing that amazed me about that emotional journey was how little is done in law firms and in the marketplace to address that cohort. I admire the way law firms address all sorts of other cohorts, LGBTQ, disabled, veterans. They do wonderful programs to help them advance in the career. But there's one cohort that they almost entirely ignore. And that's the cohort that everybody's going to be in, God willing, sooner or later. And that's getting older. So it's an asset that is not utilized as well as it could. It's a process that is kind of left to the individual. Some firms will give some kind of financial advice or whatever, but that's from the receiving standpoint. That's as if you walked into your doctor's office and the doctor said, "Get your affairs in order." It's not that there's a malicious desire here or anything like that. It's just that they don't. The management of firms and lawyers in general don't think about that. Their egos are too big. They feel too necessary to lawyers and to clients. So they never see that, this is going to come to an end. So embracing that and moving forward is the most difficult part of this process.
So I was really interested because, you said you worked with your firm and I had read that you said that a lot of firms don't really sort of pay attention to this, but, it seemed like your firm was very much engaged. So I'm sort of wondering.
Well, they were engaged with me, and so I can only speak to that there wasn't a program, but it was through my plan. And then I was lucky enough, obviously I hadn't big enough a book of business, so I had some leverage. So they did, they kept to the plan. They kept to the commitments that they were supposed to do from a financial standpoint and from a measurement standpoint and did those kinds of things. But it was more passive on their part but that I can blame myself for because in hindsight, I wasn't asking for all that much. I was just saying what I was going to do and then I would do it. And it was not something that was as reciprocal as if I could redo it again as I would have liked to have seen it be. That's not to criticize the firm. There were some things they did wrong, some things I did wrong. But the thing that was lacking on both sides, I think, was a much more robust communication process. Talking to one another as opposed to, "Hey, let's leave Doug alone," which I was sitting there saying, "Gee, leave me alone," kind of thing. So that was in hindsight, I think that, if a firm were to set up a more robust communication process, if it were to create a cohort of similarly situated attorneys so that they could get together almost like the group session, because that's what it is. It's a very psychological process and all the principles of psychology and change in life can be applied to this cohort as much as any others. So they could have, firms could do better with that as well, but to this day, they're not. And that's why I'm pushing this conversation as hard as I can, because I think we can do a lot better and need to do a lot better.
Well, Doug, let me also follow up on that because I think, and I'm going to say this a little bit tongue in cheek, but also I think we've all experienced it. There's a lot of partners that their retirement plan is they're going to carry me out feet first the office, right? How and you mentioned that one of the obstacles is the ego of the partner because they've got such a great book of business. They've built, a whole lifetime around and probably consider their whole uh, personality being tied to practicing law. Um,
Yeah, but I mean, imagine it's just got to be so hard, like something that you have worked on and built and grown like your entire career, most
Yeah.
of your life, and being able to say, okay, I'm just gonna let that all go and I'm gonna move on to something else. I mean, you have an outlet in writing books, you may have other activities. I'm not sure that everybody does.
there's only so much
That,
golf one
that's
can
just
play.
Well, in my case, yeah, it wouldn't matter how much I played. It wouldn't make any difference.
piece.
I fall back almost always on how do sound businesses operate. One of the things that any corporation that's going well or whatever will tell you, any leading brand will tell you that they expect succession plans from all of their executives, 5-year succession plans. I was just talking to a former partner of mine who went in-house with a big financial institution as general counsel, and he had to constantly have a succession plan in place and had to present it to them. Law firms don't do that. They don't have succession plans, a process for that. So the first thing they could do, I think, is start to talk about that and start to institute that so an individual understands that that's part of their obligation, succession. Now you can have a succession plan when you're 90 years old, as far as I'm concerned, but at least have the succession plan so they're focusing on it. Otherwise, as I saw so many times with so many lawyers in my career, they didn't plan. And they would literally die at their desk, or they would just sort of fade away where they weren't being called anymore. They weren't important anymore. As generations come up in corporations and clients, they want to talk to their peers more than they want to talk to the gray-haired person. And it's just a natural evolution. And if your ego is such, and lawyers have gigantic egos, we all do, and that you can't imagine that you're not the most important person to your client's life. It's just not how you think, because you're solving problems all the time. You're a crisis manager, all that stuff that builds your ego way beyond what it ought to be. So it is very hard to let that go. So you need help. So your firm needs to assist you in that journey at early on, and so that it's very transparent, and to help you through that process in a way that is going to keep you relevant and make you comfortable. And also, hopefully, as you said, Marlene, that you've got something else to do. I mean, I've also seen partners when I ran law firm, that in the management of law firms, who just had nothing else to do. And that was just, that is, I don't know what you can do about that. That's something that, you may just have to say, well, okay, they're the exception to the rule, but hopefully they're just few and far between.
Yeah. Well, to me, just having this conversation, I mean, the law firm itself goes through multiple of these transitions of partners, leaving the firm, retiring, where you only do it once.
Right.
And so, it's kind of hard.
Yeah, I only did it.
Yeah. But it seems unfair then to put that responsibility on the individual to basically come up with their own plan.
It's not fair. It's just not smart. Our profession, the boomers are coming out, but we're all approaching the time when we're going to retire and we're going to go on. So there's a huge age there's a lot of older attorneys that are practicing today, the boomers. And the firms if they're smart, they're going to look at that cohort and say, listen, there's a wealth of wisdom there, but it's going to leave. And we need to figure out a way to harness that and to bring it back down to the next generations of lawyers. So a firm who's thinking intelligently about this is going to say, not only do I not want that person to do it alone, I want to create a support group around those people. I want to make them feel relevant. I want to keep them on to this to some extent, make them feel important, but also be very frank with them about, hey, we have to have a process of succession. And if you have I need firms that have that kind of dialogue with their older partners. And I'll tell you, they're going to be, you can count them on one hand if you've lost 3 fingers.
Well, Doug, in reading managing your transition out, you had a couple of barriers going on in that, you were turning 70 and trying to manage your transition, and then all of a sudden COVID hits and we all go remote, and that just must have been incredibly challenging at the time. Can you share your experience during this time, and particularly how you navigated the transition out of your firm, and what lessons that you learned dealing with circumstances around your specific retirement?
Yeah, now on the technology side, I was somewhat lucky in that I decided to go remote before COVID hit and moved to North Carolina. And it's very funny. The managing partner at the time said, "Gee, Doug, I don't know if that's going to work or not." I said, "Too bad, I'm going." So I had all the technology in place. So that side of it during the COVID change was relatively painless. The other side of it, where I was transitioning clients to other lawyers and wanting to make sure they knew the client, met the client, whatever it was, became much more difficult because there were no more meetings. There were no more lunches, no more dinners, no more any of that kind of socializing. So you had to do it on Zoom meetings, and they were all wonky. If you remember in the beginning, they didn't work right. And people wouldn't realize that they're on camera. So what they're doing, whatever. I mean, it became ridiculous. I had meetings where I think we had one meeting where there was a parrot on one guy's shoulder. So we all had those stories. But that was the challenge, to really sort of find a way of something totally new way to communicate. You always knew about video conferencing and stuff like that. And there were people trying to sell it, but nobody really bought into it in the pre-COVID days in any extensive degree. So that was the challenge, is trying to create a bridge to a personal relationship between new attorneys and my clients without having any physical presence of one another. I would literally do Zoom lunches. I would ship a lunch to the client's house, and then we would get out and have lunch together with the other attorney. And so we would try to do innovative things that were a little different to try to bridge that gap. And in the end, it all worked out. I think we all sort of eventually evolved into the COVID world and the remote world. And it seems to be, if you like that world, it seems to be manageable today.
So I'm really curious about client feedback and sort of the client side. Just talk a little bit about sort of how you tried to make the transition, produce people. Clients often have more than one counsel, and they also have personal relationships with their counsel. And to sort of bring somebody new in may not always go over that great. So what type of feedback did you get from clients?
Yeah,
Why do you think
most of it was positive. They kind of understood. Like, they were asking questions even before I told them, what are you doing, Doug? Why are you moving to North Carolina? That kind of stuff. So there were elements in the conversation, but I did something that I always urged all my partners to do when they were, worked when I was managing business. And that was, if you really want to build a large book of business, the key to it is to delegate the work. So that the more lawyers you have working on, it's a simple thing. And the more lawyers you have working on your matters, the more money you're going to make. Like that, it's simple. But lawyers, for the most part, are very possessive. They're afraid to delegate because they're afraid to lose a client. So I would urge them, I'd say, listen, you may lose a client. And let's say you've got a $5 million book of business you've been able to create because you've delegated, and you lose $500,000. You're still going to do a lot better off than if you just had a $2 million business because you're busting your ass trying to do all the work. But most lawyers didn't do that. I used to joke, say, I want to be the laziest lawyer in the world. And as soon as anything ever came in, I just delegated. There was a one year at Reed Smith, there were 300 lawyers that worked on my matters in some incremental kind of time. So when I did my transition, Marie, to get to the question, I had already sort of done it. I had kind of brought everybody else in and built out the relationship. So when I transitioned, we didn't lose a single client. We lost some pieces of a few because they had other relationships, as you mentioned, Arlene. But the vast bulk of the business stayed together. And I think it was really because I delegated a whole hell of a lot when I was practicing law, and I gained business over the years. It was just part of the business. And I would, again, have my written plan. I would put down my tactics. I would do all of those things in a very diligent way. And clients eventually came around. And a few of them, though, I will say a few said, no, you can't go. You can't leave. You're not going anywhere. And so I still have some relationships with some clients who are more kind of consigliere. They call me maybe once in a while or whatever and bounce stuff, which makes me feel very good. I mean, look, I That's the relevancy factor. If all my clients had said, "Hey, great, Doug, enjoy golf, see you," that would have crushed me. So the part of me wanted them to resist. The other part of me wanted them to say, "Okay." So it was an interesting thing. But it's a mix. But for the most part, I was like, they responded well to it.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you planned very well for it. Like they already knew the team. They knew
Well,
what
that's
you
the
planned
key.
already. So it wasn't like,
That's the key. And the planning can be, again, it's a two-way street. If the law firms would lean into this idea of a program where they help senior lawyers transition and build plans and do this kind of thing, it's going to be a plus for both sides of the equation. Law firms, however, they just don't think so.
And for the clients that you didn't want to continue doing work for, did you just double your billing rate and that discouraged them?
Oh, here's the funniest thing of all. When I left Reed Smith, my billing rate was $1,925 an hour, at a ridiculously high rate. So when these clients came to me, they said, almost sheepishly, "Now what's your billing rate?" I said, "No, it's not going to be $1,925. Are you crazy? I don't have any overhead." So I lowered my price to let the world know to $750 an hour. It was just as if they were getting the bargain of the year.
Yeah.
And I said to one client who jumped right on, and I said, "Oh, wait a minute, did I say $750? Now let me correct that."
Yeah, there's a 1 in front of that.
Yeah, it's not. No, it's I could have gotten away with that. But maybe I should have. I don't know. It's too late now. They know what it is.
Well, Doug, in your book, you shared lots of personal stories about your career. If you had to pull out one that you believe encapsulates the most important lesson of your book, what do you think that would be?
Yeah, I thought about that question, and there was one client I had who was almost like a brother to me, a guy named Eddie Phillips. He brought into the business here, Belvedere and Chopin vodkas. He was in the distill business, the still spirits business in fact. And he was a philanthropic man. He was a very wise man. He was the son of Dear Abby. So you can imagine sort of what his childhood was growing up with his mother's Dear Abby. But he brought me into the sale of his company to LVMH in 2004. And he was doing extremely well. And I thought everything was fine. And we're walking along the street in Paris one afternoon, doing the deal in Paris. And I said to him, I said, "Eddie, why are you selling now? You're at the top of the game. Your profits are going up. Why are you selling now?" And he said, "Well, I looked at what was around me and I said that I'm individually no longer adding value to it. It's growing because it's growing, but it's not growing because I'm adding value. So it's better for me and better for the business to find another place to add value and to let somebody else who can add value take this business to the next level." That really hit. So he goes, and he said, "And sometime sooner or later, you're going to get to a point where you're going to have to ask us that very difficult question. Are you continuing to add value or are you just treading water?" So that's the most difficult question you face as you get into the seniors. Are you adding value to the client or are you just treading water and just waiting for the day to come? That is a moment.
a true client service lesson. So, Doug, we have reached the point in the podcast where we ask all of our guests a crystal ball question. And the question we're going to ask you is, what do you see as a change or a challenge in the next 2 to 5 years that the legal industry is going to?
Canned answer is AI. Everybody says AI. To me, that's not the answer. To me, it's what I call the generational gap. So COVID took everybody away from one another in the traditional way we learned law, where we learned to interact with clients, so we learned to interact with each other. We suddenly became distant and remote. The pictures, images on a screen that they could be put on mute, that could be put on blank, they could whatever. So that a totally different kind of a relationship that my generation has now with the younger generation, where there's no longer that kind of the physical presence together and all the things that helped me learn how to be a lawyer. Trying for management of law firms to get back to that is a very hard road for them. Most of them, vast majority, are still not back in the office 100%, not even close. Most are sort of at 50% maybe, or a couple of days a week. I watch this and I say to myself, how sustainable is that in the next 3 to 5, 10 years? The technology is going to do what it does, and all those things are going to sort of get dealt with. But the interpersonal relationships and the passing on of the torch is much more difficult today from my perspective. And I think it's a challenge firms have to figure out how to do, how to engage that again. Farmers don't come in. They're financially, I'm spoiled, obviously. I don't go in because I live in North Carolina. I can financially advantage. I don't have to go. Senior partners in particular are similarly situated like that. They got spoiled during COVID, and they don't necessarily want to go into the office. So if you think of the imbalance that creates, first of all, you got all your staffs there. They have to go there, so they don't have that privilege. That creates a tension. Then your young associates are coming in when they come in. The partners are coming in when they come in. How is that a cohesive way to build business, to build connections, to build somebody who's not going to just be a journeyman and look to lead every 3 years or just chase the greener pasture, wherever that's going to be? If I worked for management, which I would not want to be today, if I worked for management again, I would try this. I'd be scratching my head. How do we get back to breaking that generational gap that is increasing as we move forward?
Well, Douglas J. Wood, author of From Dawn Till Dusk. Want to thank you very much for coming in and talking with us today. This has been great.
And of course, thanks to all of you, our listeners, for taking the time to listen to the Gear Review podcast. If you enjoy the show, share it with a colleague. We'd love to hear from you, so reach out to us on LinkedIn. Is there any particular place that you want to point listeners to learn more or reach out to you?
Yeah, you can. My website is douglasjwood.com. You can see all my books and stuff there. And I could be reached by a email at douglas.wood@wood.law.
Okay.
Yes.
And as always, the music you hear is from Jerry David. Jerry.
Thanks, Jerry.
Okay, bye-bye.